My mom noticed my husband acting strange at work. I didn't believe her. Until that night, my mother always insisted that a woman's intuition is sharper than any paring knife. But I chose to ignore her warnings about my husband. I believed my marriage of 10 years was an impenetrable fortress until that fateful night I witnessed what his overtime work actually looked like. I did not cry. I simply stood there in the dark and began planning exactly how to turn his perfect life into a pile of beautiful ashes. My name is Harper Sterling, and at 36 years old, I had curated my life with the same ruthless precision I applied to my landscape architecture projects. Living in Seattle, a city that often felt like it was drowning in gray drizzle, I prided myself on creating pockets of structured beauty. I believed that if you laid the foundation correctly, accounted for the drainage, and chose the right perennials, nothing could rot from the inside out. My marriage was the centerpiece of this design. I was not the type of woman who let weeds grow in her garden, and I certainly was not the type of woman who missed red flags. Or so I told myself as I poured a glass of Merlot and waited for my mother to stop pacing around my pristine quartz kitchen island. My husband, Greg, was the envy of my friends. As the sales director at Horizon Peak Ventures, he was successful, charming, and possessed a smile that could disarm a traffic cop. He was the man who remembered anniversaries and always came home at 6:30 in the evening on the dot, smelling of expensive cologne and hard work. Our life was a series of perfectly executed calendar events, until my mother, Beatrice, decided to crash into our Tuesday evening with a casserole dish in one hand and a grenade in the other. Beatrice was a retired high school history teacher who treated every conversation like an interrogation she was determined to win. She loved me, but she also loved to find cracks in the pavement. That afternoon, she had driven to Greg's office to drop off a silk tie he had left at her house during Sunday brunch. "I am telling you what I saw." "Harper," she said, slamming the casserole onto the counter a little too hard. I was pulling out of the visitor lot, and I looked over at the VIP section. Greg was in his car. He was not alone. I swirled my wine, feeling a headache forming behind my eyes. "Mom, please." "He has meetings. Sometimes he takes clients to lunch. Or maybe he was giving a colleague a lift to the subway." Beatrice narrowed her eyes, leaning over the island. It was not a colleague lift. Harper. He was sitting there. Just sitting there with the engine off. There was a girl in the passenger seat. Young, red hair. And Greg. He was reaching over and tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. I know that look. It was tender. I laughed, but the sound was brittle and hollow in the quiet kitchen. "You were 50 feet away in the rain. You probably saw him adjusting the rearview mirror. Or maybe he was reaching for his briefcase in the back seat. Honestly. Mom, you need to get your prescription checked." "My eyes are fine," she snapped, her voice dropping to a whisper that grated on my nerves. A mother knows. A mother always knows when the wolf is at the door. "Greg is not a wolf," I retorted, my voice rising in defense of the man who had bought me organic tulips just 2 days ago. "He is the most loyal man I know. He is probably exhausted right now dealing with the Japanese investors. Do not ruin dinner with these soap opera fantasies." I felt a surge of irritation. Why did she always have to pick at things? Why could she not just let me be happy in my perfect house with my perfect husband? I listed off his schedule from memory, proving he had no time for a sordid affair. I reminded her that Greg hated redheads because his high school bully was a ginger. I built a wall of logic so high that her accusations could not possibly scale it. Beatrice sighed, the fight draining out of her shoulders. "Fine. Maybe it was the rain. Maybe I am just an old woman seeing ghosts." Just then, the garage door rumbled open, the sound of the engine cut off, and a moment later, Greg walked through the door. He looked immaculate, though his shoulders slumped with theatrical fatigue. "Honey, I am home," he called out, flashing that $1,000,000 smile that made my knees weak. Traffic was a nightmare on I-5. I am absolutely beat. He kissed my cheek, his lips warm and familiar. He greeted my mother with polite enthusiasm, asking about her day. I watched him take off his jacket and loosen his tie, a blue one, not the one my mother had returned. He looked so normal, so completely, utterly mine. I looked at my mother, feeling a smug sense of victory. She looked down at her plate, defeated. I felt a pang of guilt for dismissing her so harshly. She was just lonely and overprotective. See? I whispered to myself as I plated the roast chicken. Nothing to worry about. I went to bed that night nestled against Greg's back, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing. I told myself that my fortress was secure. I told myself that Beatrice was wrong. But as I stared into the darkness, the image my mother had painted refused to fade. A red-haired girl, a hand tucked behind an ear. It was ridiculous. It was impossible. But for the first time in 10 years, I did not fall asleep immediately. I lay there, and a single, tiny, cold seed of doubt buried itself deep in the soil of my mind. For 7 days, the house was quiet. The seed of doubt my mother had planted withered under the bright lights of my denial. I convinced myself that Beatrice was just projecting her own insecurities onto my flawless marriage. Then came Friday. The air in Seattle was thick with impending rain when Greg called me at 4 in the afternoon. "Babe, I am so sorry," Greg said, his voice dropping to that hush he used when he was in the boardroom. "The Tokyo team. They just blew up the merger terms. I have to stay. It is going to be a long night." "Oh, Greg," I said, looking at the marinating steaks on the counter. "Do you need me to bring you anything? A change of clothes?" No. Just go to sleep. Do not wait up for me. I love you." He hung up. I stared at the phone, feeling a surge of affection for this hard-working man. To prove to myself and to the universe that I was a supportive wife who trusted her husband implicitly, I decided to do something sweet. I packed a gourmet late-night picnic basket with his favorite roast beef sandwiches and a thermos of black coffee. I wanted to surprise him. I wanted to walk into his office, kiss his tired forehead, and silently apologize for ever listening to my mother. I arrived at the Horizon Peak Ventures building at 10 at night. The lobby was empty, the marble floors gleaming under the security lights. I waved at Ralph, the night guard who had known us for 5 years. "Evening. Mrs. Sterling," Ralph said, looking up from his crossword puzzle. "What brings you here this late? Just bringing Greg some fuel," I said, lifting the basket with a smile. "Is he in the big conference room or his office?" Ralph frowned, his pen hovering over the paper. "Mr. Sterling. He left hours ago. I saw him drive out of the garage around 6 this evening." My smile froze. The basket suddenly felt heavy, dragging my arm down. "Are you sure he said he had a crisis meeting?" "I am sure, ma'am." He waved at me, said to have a good weekend. I walked back to my car, my legs feeling like they were made of lead. I sat in the driver's seat, the smell of roast beef filling the small space, suddenly making me gag. I needed to think. I remembered the iPad Greg used for client presentations. He often left it in his briefcase, but sometimes, on weekends, we used it to watch movies. I opened the glove compartment. It was there. My fingers trembled as I unlocked it. Greg was terrible with technology. He never turned off the location sharing because he claimed he had nothing to hide. I opened the tracking app. The blue dot representing his phone was not at the office. It was not at home. It was pulsing steadily in the downtown district. I drove. I did not feel the steering wheel under my hands. I was an automaton, guided by a terrifying curiosity. The dot led me to a place called the Velvet Lounge. It was a dimly lit, exclusive bar known for its overpriced cocktails and dark corners, certainly not a place for a conference call with Tokyo. I parked across the street, keeping the engine running. The rain began to streak the windshield, blurring the neon lights into jagged lines of red and blue. I waited. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Then, the heavy oak doors opened. Greg walked out. He was not alone. Clinging to his arm was a woman. She was young, perhaps in her early 20s, wearing a dress that cost more than my first car. And she had red hair, a cascade of fiery curls that bounced as she laughed at something he whispered. My mother's voice echoed in my head. A mother always knows. I watched, paralyzed, as Greg stopped on the sidewalk. He turned to the girl. The way he looked at her was not the look of a tired executive. It was the look of a starving man. He cupped her face in his hands, the same hands that had held mine at the altar, and kissed her. It was not a quick goodbye peck. It was a deep, devouring kiss. He pulled her body against his, oblivious to the rain, oblivious to the world, oblivious to the wife watching from across the street. "No," I whispered, the sound barely escaping my throat. "Please, Greg." No. Nausea crashed into me, violent and sudden. I wanted to open the car door and vomit on the pavement. I wanted to run across the street and scream until my throat bled, but I did not. Instead, a strange, cold clarity washed over my brain. It was as if a switch had been flipped. I reached for my phone. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped it, but I steadied them against the steering wheel. I opened the camera app, zoomed in, click, Greg's hand on her waist, click, the girl throwing her head back in laughter, click, their lips meeting again just before they climbed into an Uber. I lowered the phone. The screen glowed with the evidence of my shattered life. The Harper Sterling who believed in fairy tales and trusted blindly died in that driver's seat. I wiped a single tear that had dared to escape, put the car in gear, and drove away. I did not go home to cry. I went home to plan. I returned to the house that no longer felt like a home, carrying the picnic basket like a casket containing the corpse of my marriage. I walked into the kitchen and dumped the gourmet roast beef sandwiches and the expensive bottle of wine directly into the trash compactor. The crunching sound of the glass breaking was the most satisfying thing I had heard all evening. I did not turn on the lights. Instead, I sat in the wingback chair in the corner of the living room, shrouded in darkness, and began to dissect 10 years of history. Every late night, every sudden business trip, every time he had been too tired for intimacy, I replayed them all, stripping away the excuses I had invented to protect myself. I realized I had not just been blind. I had been willfully shutting my eyes. The front door opened at 1 a.m. Greg stumbled in, trying to be quiet but failing miserably as he knocked his keys against the entry table. The air shifted, carrying the scent of him to where I sat. He smelled of stale gin, cigarette smoke, and a cloying, vanilla-heavy perfume that made my stomach turn. He peered into the dark living room. "Harper, are you awake?" I held my breath, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I let my head loll to the side, feigning a deep sleep. He sighed, a sound of relief that made me want to scream, and crept upstairs. I waited 10 minutes before following him, slipping into bed beside the stranger I had married. The next morning, I did not wake him with accusations. I did not throw the photos in his face. Instead, I woke up at 6 a.m, showered, and brewed his favorite dark roast coffee. When he shuffled into the kitchen, looking hungover and guilty, I was already dressed in my crispest blouse, smiling like the Stepford wife he thought he owned. "Here is your coffee, darling," I said, placing the mug on the counter. "You were out so late." "Did the negotiations go well?" Greg took a sip, avoiding my eyes. "It was brutal. The Japanese team just would not budge on the valuation. I felt like I was in a war zone." "You poor thing," I cooed, smoothing the collar of his shirt. "Well, you are the best negotiator they have. I am sure you will fix it. Inside, I was screaming, but on the outside, I was ice. I had a new rule: never alert the prey while the trap is still being built. If I confronted him now, he would hide his assets, delete his messages, and gaslight me until I questioned my own sanity. I needed to protect my financial future, my reputation, and my dignity. Once Greg left for work, I picked up the phone and dialed a number I had not used in years. Sarah was a ruthless divorce attorney who had been my sorority sister in college. Harper. Sarah answered, her voice surprised. It has been ages. To what do I owe the pleasure I need to ask you a hypothetical question? I said, my voice steady. If a woman wanted to ensure her husband left a marriage with nothing but the shirt on his back, what would be the first step? Sarah paused, and I could hear the smile in her voice when she replied. She would need documentation, financial records, emails, and she would need to keep her mouth shut until the papers were served. Understood, I said. That evening, while Greg was in the shower washing away the guilt of his day, I opened his laptop. He thought I did not know the password, but I had seen him type it in 100 times, Go Seahawks 12. Men are so disappointingly predictable. I bypassed his inbox and went straight to the digital trash bin, which he had forgotten to empty. There they were, dozens of emails, hotel confirmations, receipts for jewelry I never received, and threads with a user named EmberFlynn99. I did a quick search on his company directory. Ember Flynn, 24 years old, marketing intern. I stared at her employee photo. She was pretty in a generic, wide-eyed way. She looked like she had never paid a mortgage or worried about retirement funds. She looked like a cliché. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was my mother. Harper, Beatrice said, her tone cautious. I was just calling to check in. How is everything? I looked at the face of the girl who was sleeping with my husband. I thought about the vindication my mother deserved, but I could not give it to her yet. She would explode, and her anger would tip off Greg. Everything is fine, Mom. I lied, my voice bright. Greg is just working hard. You know how it is. Oh, she said, sounding disappointed. Well, all right, just keep your eyes open, dear. I will, I whispered. I hung up and created a new folder on a secure cloud drive that Greg did not know existed. I dragged the recovered emails, the bank statements, and the photos from the night before into it. I renamed the folder the Betrayal file. As the upload bar filled to 100%, I felt a strange sense of calm. The grieving wife was gone. The architect was back, and I was about to design a demolition. I needed to get close to Ember without triggering her defenses, so I became someone else. I spent 3 hours one evening crafting a LinkedIn profile for Victoria Vance, a senior executive recruiter based in New York City. I used a stock photo of a sharp-looking woman in a blazer and filled the profile with buzzwords about talent acquisition and high-level placement. Then, I sent Ember a connection request. She accepted within 12 minutes. Nice to meet you, Victoria. She messaged, I am always open to new opportunities. We should definitely talk soon. I replied, planting the seed. While I worked on gaining her trust, Greg was busy transforming into a cliché. He started coming home with shopping bags from boutiques he had never stepped foot in before. He swapped his sensible cotton briefs for silk boxers that looked ridiculous on him. He joined a 24-hour gym and spent hours flexing in the bathroom mirror, sucking in his gut. Do I look tighter? He asked me one night, posing in the doorway. You look fantastic, honey, I said, not looking up from my book. Like a new man. The irony was lost on him. He was too busy texting under the dinner table, a dopey grin plastered on his face. He thought he was being subtle. He thought I was blind. But I was just waiting for him to take a shower. The moment the water started running, I opened his laptop again. This time, I did not just look. I installed a keylogger software that my lawyer friend had quietly recommended. It recorded every keystroke, every password, and every deleted draft. Within 24 hours, I had access to everything. I sat in my home office and read the email thread between Greg and Ember. It was worse than I thought. It was not just sex. It was a conspiracy. She is clueless. Greg had written on Tuesday at 10 in the morning. I just need to move the liquid assets into the offshore shell before I serve her papers. Give me 2 more months, baby. Then we will have everything. My blood ran cold. He was planning to leave me destitute. I kept digging. I found a recurring payment of $4,500 labeled consulting fees in his business account. I traced the routing number to a luxury apartment complex downtown called the Meridian. The next day, I put on a wig and large sunglasses and walked into the leasing office of the Meridian. I am looking for a corporate rental for a client, I told the leasing agent, ideally something similar to Unit 4B. Oh, that is a lovely unit, the agent chirped. We have a similar layout on the 5th floor. She showed me the apartment. I took photos of everything: the marble countertops, the floor-to-ceiling windows, the high-end appliances. I knew exactly where my husband's consulting fees were going. This was their love nest, funded by the money we had saved for our future retirement home. When I returned home, I found a crumbled receipt in his jacket pocket while taking it to the dry cleaners. It was from a jeweler, a diamond pendant necklace costing $3,000. The date on the receipt was October 12th, our 10th wedding anniversary. I remembered that night. Greg had come home with a bouquet of tulips that were already drooping and a card he had clearly bought at a gas station. Sorry, babe, he had said. Work was crazy. I did not have time to shop. I stared at the receipt. He had bought diamonds for her on the same day he gave me garbage. That was the moment the last shred of my hesitation evaporated. I logged into our joint accounts. I did not take everything at once. That would raise flags. Instead, I began a systematic siphoning. I moved $7,000 here, $5,000 there. I transferred the funds into investment accounts solely in my mother's name or into secure offshore trusts my lawyer had set up. Then, I drafted the trap. I printed out a document titled Asset Protection and Liability Agreement. That night, over a dinner of his favorite lasagna, I slid the paper across the table. Greg, my accountant is worried about the liability with my new landscape projects, I said, my voice trembling with fake anxiety. If I get sued, they could come after your bonuses. We need to separate our primary assets to protect your commission. Greg's eyes lit up. He saw a way to shield his money from me without him having to ask for it. That makes sense, he said, pulling a pen from his pocket. We have to be smart about this. You are always thinking ahead. Harper. I try, I said. He signed the document without reading the fine print on page 4. The clause stated that in the event of infidelity proven by digital evidence, the signatory forfeited all claims to the marital home and 70% of joint liquid assets. Done, he said, handing the paper back to me. Now, are we okay for Saturday? I have that strategy meeting. Of course, I smiled, tucking the signed document into my folder. Strategy is important. The annual Horizon Peak Ventures cocktail party was usually an event I dreaded, filled with lukewarm white wine and conversations about market volatility. This year, however, I anticipated it with the hunger of a lioness stalking a gazelle. Greg had suggested I might want to stay home, citing my recent stress. But I insisted. I did not just dress for the occasion. I armored myself. I chose a silk gown in a shade of scarlet so deep and vibrant it looked like fresh arterial blood. It was a dress designed to draw every eye in the room, specifically the eyes of the woman who thought she could erase me. When I descended the stairs, Greg swallowed hard. You look incredible, Harper, but is it a bit much? Nonsense, darling, I said, smoothing the fabric over my hips. A wife should always look her best for her husband's big night. Do you not agree? At the venue, I played the role of the doting trophy wife to perfection. I looped my arm through Greg's, gripping his bicep just tightly enough to restrict his circulation slightly. I laughed too loudly at his boss's terrible jokes. I smoothed Greg's lapels constantly, marking my territory with every touch. He was sweating, his eyes darting around the room, terrified that his two worlds were about to collide. And then, I saw her. Ember. She was standing near the shrimp cocktail tower, wearing a silver dress that was tight enough to show off the gym body Greg was paying for. She looked nervous, her eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on us. She froze. Oh, look, I exclaimed, dragging a reluctant Greg toward her. That must be the new intern you mentioned. The bright one. Greg stiffened. Harper, we really should go say hello to the CFO. Nonsense. I cut him off, pulling him forward. We stopped directly in front of her. Hello. You must be Ember. Greg has told me so much about your work ethic. Ember looked like she wanted to dissolve into the carpet. Mrs. Sterling, it is an honor. Greg, Mr. Sterling is a great boss. Please, call me Harper. I beamed, releasing Greg's arm to take her hand. Her palm was clammy. I actually wanted to meet you. I heard you have a knack for creative problem solving. I have a friend who runs a massive firm in New York. They are looking for young talent. I would love to connect you. It could be a huge career jump. Ember's eyes widened, a flash of ambition warring with her guilt. Oh, that sounds amazing. I bet it does, I said, leaning in conspiratorially. Honestly, you are doing me a favor taking so much work off Greg's plate. The man is falling apart at home. You would not believe it looking at him. But he is a mess. Greg looked like he was about to choke on his olive. Harper! I ignored him, keeping my eyes locked on Ember. He snores like a dying tractor. Ember. I have to wear industrial earplugs every night, and he is so cheap he makes me reuse aluminum foil. Can you imagine, and do not get me started on the foot fungus cream he leaves all over the bathroom counter. It is hardly the romance of the century. I watched Ember's face twitch. She looked at Greg, searching for the suave, generous lover she knew, but all she saw was a red-faced man shifting uncomfortably in his shoes. The image was cracking. Anyway, I sighed, taking a sip of champagne. I just hope he holds on to this job. Between us girls, rumors are flying about a hostile takeover. Horizon Peak is in deep financial trouble. If Greg gets laid off, well, we might lose the house. He has practically zero savings left. It was a lie. Of course. Greg had plenty of money he was trying to steal from me, but Ember did not know that. I saw the panic flare in her eyes. The diamond necklace he bought her suddenly felt like an anchor if the ship was sinking. That is terrible, Ember stammered, taking a step back. It is life, I said cheerfully. But thank you for being such a dedicated employee. Ember, it is rare to find someone willing to go the extra mile. Or 10. I flashed her a smile that did not reach my eyes. It was a predator's smile. Ember shivered, though the room was warm. Nice meeting you, she squeaked, and practically ran toward the bathroom. On the drive home, the silence in the car was heavy. Greg stared out the window, his knuckles white on his knees. What were you talking to her about? He asked finally, his voice tight. You seemed intense. I turned to him, my face a mask of serene innocence. Oh, nothing important, honey, I said, patting his knee. Just girl talk. The art of war is not about overpowering your enemy with force. It is about turning their own ranks against each other. I started my campaign with a $20 burner phone bought with cash at a convenience store 3 towns over. Sitting in my car, I typed a message to Ember. He is playing you, sweetie. Ask him why he spends so much time at the desk of the blonde girl in accounting. I hit send and tossed the phone into a public trash can. It was a petty lie Greg barely knew where accounting was, but paranoia is a weed that grows best in the soil of insecurity. At home, I began to water the seeds of Greg's own jealousy. I left a business card for a Julian Vane, private wealth manager, on the kitchen counter. I had actually designed the card myself, choosing a font that screamed old money and masculinity. Beside it, I left a receipt for a $600 spa package for 2. When Greg came home, his eyes went straight to the card. Who is Julian? He asked, trying to sound casual but failing as his voice cracked. Oh, just a charming man I met at the gallery opening, I said, checking my reflection in the mirror and applying a coat of lipstick. He has some fascinating ideas about liquidity. I am going out for drinks with the girls. Do not wait up. I saw the panic flare in his eyes. For the first time in years, Greg was not thinking about his mistress. He was terrified that his trophy wife was looking for a new shelf. He spent the next 3 days hovering around me, texting me constantly, and coming home early. This, of course, meant he was ignoring Ember. The recording device I had planted under the passenger seat of his SUV captured the fallout perfectly. I listened to it with headphones while drinking tea. "You are ignoring me." Ember's voice shrieked through the static. 3 days. Greg, and now I hear you were taking her out to dinner. You said you were leaving her. I am trying to keep her calm, Ember Greg yelled back, sounding exhausted. She is acting weird. I think she is seeing someone. I need to secure the assets before I make a move. I do not care about her. Ember sobbed. I want to know why you were looking at ring designs on your work computer. Are they for her, or that accountant? I smiled. The burner text had landed. While Greg was distracted by his 2 crumbling worlds, I executed the next phase of the financial extraction. I approached him on a Tuesday night, holding a stack of legal documents. Greg, my new shell company is finalized, I said, looking frantic. But my lawyer says if we keep the lake house in both our names, the IRS might audit us both next year. We need to transfer the deed to my sole ownership just for tax purposes. It is just a formality to hide the asset trail. Greg, who was currently terrified that I was planning to leave him for a man named Julian, saw this as a way to keep me bound to him. Plus, he was desperate to hide assets from the divorce he was secretly planning. That is smart, he said, grabbing the pen. We hide it in your name, then we move it back later. Good thinking, babe. He signed the deed transfer without reading the paragraph that stated the transfer was irrevocable and part of a post-nuptial separate property agreement. The lake house, worth $2 million, was now legally mine. The next day, I twisted the knife. Greg came home to find his beloved Porsche 911 missing from the driveway. In its place sat a used, beige sedan with a dent in the bumper. "Where is my car?" he screamed, running into the house. "I sold it," I said calmly, chopping carrots. "I got a great cash offer. With the rumors about your company's finances, I thought we needed to be frugal. We cannot be seen driving sports cars if you are about to be unemployed. Greg, it looks bad. You sold my Porsche," he sputtered, his face turning purple. "For the family, honey," I said. "We have to sacrifice." He could not argue without admitting he had plenty of money hidden away. He stormed upstairs, and I heard him kicking the furniture. Meanwhile, my mother, Beatrice, was deploying the nuclear option at the country club. Between bridge games and mimosas, she whispered to the wives of the city's elite. "Poor Harper," she would say, shaking her head. "Greg is in such deep trouble. I heard the SEC is involved. Possible embezzlement. He might lose everything. I just hope he stays out of prison. In a city like Seattle, gossip travels faster than light. Within 48 hours, the rumor reached Ember. I knew she heard it because the next recording from the car was not an argument about love. It was a demand. "I need $10,000. Greg," Ember said, her voice cold and hard. "Cash. Today. My landlord is raising the rent, and I am not going to wait around while you go broke and go to jail. I am not going to jail." Greg screamed, sounding like a man on the edge of a breakdown. "Who told you that everyone knows?" she yelled. "Pay me, or I walk." I took off my headphones and poured myself another cup of tea. The rats were turning on each other, and the ship had not even sunk yet. Greg looked like a man being slowly crushed between 2 tectonic plates. His eyes were rimmed with red, and he had developed a nervous tic in his left eyelid that twitched whenever his phone buzzed. Between satisfying Ember's escalating demands for cash and trying to navigate the minefield of paranoia I had laid at home, he was running on fumes. I almost felt bad for him. Almost. On a Wednesday evening, while he was aggressively massaging his temples at the dinner table. I made my move. "Greg, darling," I said, placing a hand on his shoulder. I have been thinking, with all the stress lately, and those nasty rumors Mom mentioned, we need to make a statement. Your 40th birthday is next week. I want to throw you a gala. Greg looked up, his eyes wary. A party. Now I do not know. Is that wise? It is essential, I insisted, pouring him a glass of wine. We invite everyone, the board members, your clients, the whole team. We show them that Greg Sterling is thriving. We show them we are the perfect, powerful couple. It will silence the gossip instantly. I saw the desperation in his eyes turn into hope. He needed this validation like a drug. You are right, he exhaled. You are always right. Harper, let us do it. I threw myself into the preparations with manic precision. I booked the caterers and the florists, and then I sent out the invitations. I made sure to send a personal email to the marketing department. Ember, I said when I called her desk directly. I am organizing a birthday gala for Greg. As the rising star of the department, I think it would be wonderful if you attended as the junior representative. It would mean so much to him to have his team there. Oh, she stammered on the other end. I would love to come. Mrs. Sterling. She probably thought this was her chance to shine, or perhaps to gloat secretly while watching me play the oblivious wife. She had no idea she was the guest of honor at her own execution. For the entertainment, I told Greg I was preparing a slideshow titled A Decade of Greg. He smiled, expecting baby photos and wedding memories. I spent 3 nights in the guest room editing the footage. I spliced scenes of our vow renewal with the dashcam video of him groping her outside the bar. I layered the audio of him promising to love me forever over the recording of him calling me a frigid bore to his mistress. It was a masterpiece of cinematic cruelty. 2 days before the party, I walked into our bank branch. I sat down with the manager and requested a cashier's check for the entire balance of our joint savings and checking accounts. Everything, Mrs. Sterling, the teller asked, blinking at the screen. Leave $10, I said calmly. Just enough to keep the account open for a few more days. I transferred the money into an offshore trust that my lawyer had finalized that morning. Greg would not get a notification because I had helpfully changed the contact email on the account to my own just the day before, claiming his inbox was too full of spam. Back at the house, I began the physical extraction. I told Greg I was doing a deep clean to prepare for the party guests. I am moving some of the clutter to storage. I told him as I packed my grandmother's silverware, my jewelry, and my expensive architectural reference books into boxes. Great idea, babe, he said, not even looking up from his phone where he was undoubtedly texting Ember. He did not notice that the clutter was actually everything of value I owned. By Friday afternoon, the house was a staged shell. On the eve of the party, Greg came home with a small velvet box. He handed it to me with a sheepish grin. I know I have been distant, he said. This is just a small thank you for everything you are doing. I opened the box. Inside was a silver-plated bracelet with a generic heart charm. I had seen the same one at the mall kiosk for $40. I knew from his credit card statement that he had bought Ember a Louis Vuitton clutch that morning. Oh, Greg. It is. I touched the cheap metal, forcing tears into my eyes. It is beautiful. I will wear it tomorrow night. He hugged me, relieved that his token gesture had worked. That night, I lay awake while he snored beside me. The room was bathed in moonlight. I propped myself up on one elbow and looked at his face. He looked peaceful, confident that he had successfully duped his wife and placated his mistress. Sleep well, Greg. I whispered into the darkness. Enjoy the dream while it lasts. I felt a cold, clinical pity for him. He was a man standing on a trapdoor, arrogant enough to think he was flying. Tomorrow, I would pull the lever. The morning of Greg's 40th birthday arrived with a deceptively clear sky. Our suburban villa had been transformed into a theater of opulence. By noon, the florists had filled the foyer with enough white lilies to bury a monarch, and the caterers were arranging towers of crystal glasses that caught the light like jagged diamonds. I moved through the rooms, adjusting a napkin here and straightening a fork there, ensuring the stage was set for the final act. My mother, Beatrice, was the first guest to arrive. She did not look like a retired schoolteacher today. She looked like a general inspecting the front lines. She wore a tailored navy suit that commanded respect, her silver hair coiffed into a helmet of perfection. She walked up to me, gripping my shoulders with hands that felt stronger than they looked. "Are you ready, my girl?" she asked, her voice low and steady. "I have never been more ready." "Mom," I replied, smoothing the fabric of my dress. "Good." She nodded, her eyes flashing with a fierce, protective fire. "Make it hurt." Greg descended the stairs a moment later, looking every inch the successful patriarch. He wore a bespoke tuxedo that cost $4,000, a purchase he had justified as an investment in his personal brand. He was beaming, drunk on his own importance and the illusion of safety I had so carefully constructed around him. "Wow," he said, looking around the room. "You really outdid yourself, Harper. This is magnificent. Only the best for you, darling." I smiled, fastening his cufflinks. Tonight is going to be unforgettable. The guests began to filter in at 6 in the evening. It was a who's who of Seattle's business elite. I had personally ensured that Arthur Pendleton, the CEO of Horizon Peak Ventures, was in attendance, along with 3 of their biggest investors. They clapped Greg on the back, congratulating him on his milestone, completely unaware that they were about to witness a corporate funeral. Then, Ember arrived. She breezed through the front door wearing a dress that was entirely inappropriate for a family gathering a shimmering, backless gold number with a neckline that plunged dangerously low. She scanned the room, her eyes landing on Greg with a possessive glint. When she looked at me, she offered a tight, pitying smirk. She thought she was the queen in waiting, attending the deposing of the old regime. She hovered near the bar, sipping champagne and casting longing glances at my husband, making sure every wife in the room whispered about her lack of decorum. By 8 o'clock, the main hall was packed. The air buzzed with laughter and the clinking of expensive glass. It was time. I signaled the AV technician, a young man I had paid double to follow my exact cues. The lights dimmed, casting a hush over the crowd. A spotlight hit the small stage I had set up in front of the massive projection screen. I stepped up to the microphone, clutching it with hands that were perfectly steady. Greg stood in the front row, flanked by his boss and Ember, who had inched her way closer to him. He looked up at me with a look of adoration that almost made me vomit. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice ringing clear and sweet through the speakers. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate a man who means everything to me." A collective awe rippled through the room. "Greg," I continued, locking eyes with him, "for 10 years, you have been my anchor. We have shared laughter, tears, and a bond that I thought was unbreakable. You have always told me that honesty is the foundation of our marriage. You are a man of such hidden depths." Greg wiped a tear from his eye, clearly moved by my performance. He reached out and squeezed Ember's hand briefly behind his back, thinking no one saw. I saw. "So," I said, my voice hardening just a fraction, invisible to everyone but myself. To honor the milestone of 40 years, I decided against a traditional gift. Instead, I wanted to share a special presentation, a compilation of moments that show the world exactly who Greg Sterling really is beneath the suit. I gestured to the screen behind me. "Let us take a look at the real Greg," I concluded. The room went black. The hum of the projector fan was the only sound. In the darkness, I could see the outline of Greg's smile, smug, relaxed, and utterly oblivious. He was expecting a montage of vacations and smiling selfies. He was expecting a tribute to his greatness. I stepped off the stage and into the shadows, crossing my arms as the first image began to buffer on the giant screen. The show was about to begin. The music swelled, a sentimental piano track that I had chosen specifically for its irony. And then it cut out abruptly. The screen behind me flickered. The smiling photo of Greg holding a trout from our fishing trip did not appear. Instead, a grainy black and white video feed filled the massive wall. The timestamp in the corner read, October 14th, 11:42 p.m. It was the interior of the Horizon Peak Ventures executive elevator. Greg smiled in the video, but not at the camera. He was pressed against the mirrored wall, his hands roaming freely over the body of the woman in his arms. It was Ember. The resolution was high enough that everyone could see the way her hand slid into his jacket pocket, retrieving his wallet, while he buried his face in her neck. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. It sounded like a balloon popping in a library. I saw Arthur Pendleton, Greg's CEO, drop his crystal champagne flute. It shattered on the marble floor, but no one looked down. They were paralyzed by the spectacle. The video cut to a slideshow of high-resolution screenshots. These were the emails. I had highlighted the most damning sentences in neon yellow. Subject: the old ball and chain. From G. Sterling Horizon Peak, com, to Ember Flynn 99 a Gmail, com. Body: do not worry, baby. I am moving the last $50,000 to the Cayman account on Friday. Once the house is in her name for the fake tax audit, I will file. She will be lucky if she keeps the cat. The silence in the room was replaced by a low, rumbling murmur of horror. Greg's mother, a devout woman who prided herself on propriety, swayed in her seat and collapsed into the arms of her husband. But I was not done. I had saved the best for last. And now, I said into the darkness, my voice cutting through the noise, a special message from the lady of the hour. The speakers, usually reserved for classical quartets, blasted a crystal-clear audio recording. It was the conversation I had intercepted from Greg's car 3 days ago. He is pathetic. Honestly. Ember's voice sneered through the surround sound, distorted slightly but unmistakable. He thinks he is some kind of stallion, but it is over in 2 minutes. I just close my eyes and think about the shopping trip. As soon as that settlement check clears, I am dumping his wrinkly ass. Just make sure you get the jewelry first, a friend's voice replied on the recording. Oh, I will. Ember's voice laughed. I am milking this cash cow dry. The audio cut. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a crater after the bomb has detonated. Ember let out a strangled shriek. That is not me. It is AI. It is fake. She tried to run, scrambling toward the patio doors in her towering heels, but her dress was too long. She tripped over the hem and sprawled onto the polished floor, skidding like a rag doll. No one moved to help her. Greg stood frozen. All the blood had drained from his face, leaving him looking like a wax figure melting under heat. He looked at the screen, then at his boss, then at me. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. I signaled the technician. The house lights slammed back on, blindingly bright. I stood center stage, the microphone still in my hand, looking down at my husband with the serenity of a saint. Happy birthday, sweetheart, I said, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. I did not get you a card. However, you will find the divorce papers on the gift table next to the cake. Oh, and the envelope underneath them. That is a restraining order. It goes into effect immediately. Greg took a step toward me, his hands shaking violently. Harper, wait, I can explain. Please. Before he could take another step, my mother walked out from the crowd. She moved with the grace of an executioner. She reached into her purse and pulled out a silk tie, the very same tie she had returned to his office weeks ago. She balled it up and threw it hard. It hit Greg squarely in the chest. I told you so, she said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. Greg lunged toward the stage, his eyes wild. You crazy bitch, you ruined me. Two men in black suits, private security contractors I had hired that morning for $500 an hour, stepped out from behind the curtains. They intercepted Greg before he could get within 10 feet of me. One of them placed a heavy hand on Greg's chest, stopping him dead. "Mr. Sterling," the guard rumbled. "You need to leave the premises, now." Greg looked around. His boss was refusing to make eye contact. His mistress was sobbing on the floor. His friends were looking at him with undisguised disgust. He was a king standing in the ruins of his own castle. I placed the microphone on the stand. It made a final, decisive thud. I did not look back at him. I walked down the stairs, past the stunned guests, and took my mother's arm. We walked out the front door, leaving the chaos behind us, the cool night air tasting sweeter than any wine I had ever drunk. The fallout was not a slow burn. It was an explosion that leveled Greg's world within 24 hours. The morning after the party, Arthur Pendleton called Greg into the office. He did not offer him a seat. He simply handed him a termination letter. "We cannot have a liability like you representing our values." "Greg," Arthur said, his voice cold, "your behavior was repugnant. You are done here." Greg was escorted out of the building by the same security guard he had waved to for 5 years. He lost his 6-figure salary, his stock options, and his reputation in a single stroke. Ember was even faster to jump ship. When the news broke that Greg had been fired and that I had legally secured 90% of our liquid assets through the document he had foolishly signed, her love evaporated instantly. She realized there was no penthouse, no diamond allowance, and no future. "You lied to me." She screamed at him in the parking lot, according to witnesses. "You said you were rich. You are nothing but a broke loser." She dumped him right there on the asphalt. To add insult to injury, Horizon Peak Ventures terminated her internship the following day for misconduct and violation of company policy. She was blacklisted from every major firm in the city. The divorce proceedings were brutally short. My lawyer, Sarah, walked into the mediation room and placed the folder of evidence on the table. Between the video footage, the audio recordings, and the asset separation agreement Greg had signed to save taxes, he had no leg to stand on. He walked away with his personal debt and a leased sedan. I kept the house, the lake property, and every cent of our savings. Greg was forced to sell his remaining designer suits and watches just to pay his own legal fees. He moved into a studio apartment in a rundown part of town, the kind of place with peeling paint and sirens wailing all night. Our mutual friends, the ones who had drank his wine and laughed at his jokes for a decade, cut him off completely. Nobody wanted to be associated with the man who had been publicly eviscerated by his own wife. Meanwhile, my mother and I packed our bags. We booked a first-class flight to Italy using the exact amount of money Greg had set aside to set up Ember in her new apartment. We spent 3 weeks in Positano, drinking limoncello and watching the sunset over the Amalfi coast. "You know," my mother said one evening, looking out at the ocean, "I always wanted to see Europe. I am glad Greg could finance it." When we returned, I resigned from my firm and opened my own landscape architecture studio. I named it Phoenix Designs. My first few clients came to me because of my portfolio, but soon, many came because they had heard the story. I became a sort of local legend, the woman who did not break, but instead redesigned her life with steel and grace. I hear rumors about Greg occasionally. Seattle is a small town in certain circles. Last I heard, he was trying to get a sales job at a mid-tier paper supply company, but he was rejected. The video of his birthday party had circulated quietly among hiring managers. He is a pariah, a ghost haunting the edges of a life he used to own. I do not feel happy when I hear these stories, nor do I feel sad. I feel nothing. That is the true victory. The sweetest revenge was not stripping him of his money, it was stripping him of his relevance. I realized that the best way to destroy your enemy is to live a life so vibrant, so full of color and joy, that they realize they never really touched you at all. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I sat on my back porch with Beatrice. The garden was in full bloom, a riot of lavender and roses that I had planted myself. We poured 2 glasses of vintage Pinot Noir. To intuition, I said, clinking my glass against hers. To freedom, she corrected, her eyes twinkling. And to listening to your mother. You were right. I laughed. About everything. I took a sip of wine, tasting the oak and the fruit, and looked out at the horizon. My life belonged to me again, and it was beautiful. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Please comment down below and let me know where you are tuning in from. I would love to read your thoughts and connect with you all. Do not forget to subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and smash that hype button so this story can reach even more people.